terms of the outcome, if the reviewing officer believes that your H&C application warrants a grant of the exemptions requested in your application, then the officer can make a positive stage 1 assessment of your application. This is also known as an approval in principle. And an approval in principle, an applicant who receives an approval in principle has some immigration impacts in terms of their status, whatever it is in Canada. So an approval in principle exempts an applicant from the in Canada eligibility to facilitate their PR application within Canada. So you're exempted once because you have applied anyway. So you're exempted from the requirement to apply for PR outside of Canada. Also, you're given an exemption from a requirement to meet any criteria or obligations of the Act. For instance, persons who would ordinarily be inadmissible for either criminality or medical conditions, if they are granted an approval in principle, then they would have an exemption from that requirement of the Act. Another thing an approval in principle impacts on an H&C application is it allows a foreign national to become a permanent resident subject to certain requirements. So if these requirements were not specifically waived at a stage 1, I would explain that further later in the presentation. It also puts into effect a stay of removal, which is very important, and allows the applicant to apply for a work permit or study permit. So if you have received a stage 1, positive stage 1 approval, then you'd be able to apply for a study permit or work permit, and it will also stay a removal from you being removed from Canada. So in terms of the potential outcomes and impacts, still on the same issue, after a positive stage 1 assessment is made by a reviewing officer, an applicant may receive the approval in principle letter informing the applicant that the exemption has been granted. However, it is essential that the applicant and their dependents continue to meet other admissibility requirements for which they did not request an exemption. So if, for instance, somebody submitted an application and they had an inadmissibility issue, maybe they were out of status at that time, they have to continue to, and they requested an exemption from an obligation or requirement of the Act, they have to continue to be admitted in terms of criminality and security, as well as medical grounds throughout the processing of their application. So if these requirements are not met, the application for permanent residence may be refused at stage 2. So at stage 2, if other inadmissibilities are discovered, the officer does not believe that the H&C factors outweighs these inadmissibilities, the application for permanent residence will be refused unless the officer decides to grant an exemption on the minister's initiative or at the request of the applicant. So as I said earlier, an application for H&C, we have 2 stages, and you have, as an applicant, the applicant has to maintain their admissibilities all throughout the application, even till when they get their confirmation of permanent residence. So a H&C application can be refused. If a H&C application is refused, then it can be reviewed by the federal court through an application for leave and judicial review. If the application for leave and judicial review is granted, then the matter is sent back for redetermination. But if it is refused, the matter would end there, except in cases where a federal court judge certifies a question of general importance and there's a further appeal to the federal court. So there is definitely an opportunity to have redress in court if you have if you received a negative H&C decision. So in terms of the, still on the same issue, in terms of the potential outcomes and impacts, if at the second stage of a H&C application, there are no other inadmissibilities for which an exemption was requested, as mentioned earlier, then the officer will proceed to invite the applicant for an interview to sign the confirmation of permanent residence. However, the officer would ensure the following. He would ensure that the right of permanent residence fee, if it was not paid at the time of the application submission, has been paid, and that all the applicants have valid passports. The officer would also ensure that medical, security, and criminal results are still valid, and that the applicants are not in receipt of social assistance. The officer would also question the applicants in terms of some criminal security and other statutory questions. So this is just to ensure that the applicants are still, they're still admissible, and they still fulfill all the other aspects of the act for which they did not request an exemption. So in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on H&C applications, applicants who have not submitted a H&C application can still do so if they're eligible. For applications already submitted, the applications are still under processing. No application in progress will be closed or refused because documents are missing due to COVID-19. So some documents that might be required on a H&C application are medical exams, examinations, police certificates, biometrics, and valid passports. So if that is required on an application, they are quite aware that some processes have been disrupted and some offices are closed, and an application would not be refused because you're not able to provide those documents if you have been provided a time frame to provide those documents. So applicants automatically will have 90 days to complete these steps, and once they are able to complete these steps, they should do so as soon as possible. So they should try and get those documents to the IRC office as soon as possible. So for approved applications on or before March 18, 2020, they are exempt from travel restrictions. They can come into Canada, and landing appointments are being conducted by telephone, or they may be scheduled for a later date. So if a person has received their positive stage 1 and stage 2 approval of their H&C application, then they will have the option to go for, they would be given an opportunity to come for an interview. So in conclusion, what you should take away in terms of H&C applications is who can apply for H&C application. We set out earlier that the person has to be a foreign national outside of Canada. If you're a foreign national inside of Canada. But if you're a foreign national outside of Canada, then you should be applying for PR under the other immigration classes, family, economic, or refugee. Excuse me. So if that is the case, then your H&C application has to be accompanied by another application, PR application in those categories. Also, you should not be eligible for other immigration classes, and your application should warrant a grant of humanitarian and compassionate considerations. So in terms of persons who cannot apply for H&C applications, we see people who have pending H&C applications, they should not make an application if they currently have one going on in the system. Also, for people who have received a negative IRB decision, within 12 months, there's a one-year bar, except you have a medical condition or you have children under the age of 18, which will be considered that's the best interest of the minor child. Also, you are ineligible from applying if you are designated foreign national. So if the minister of public safety designates a person as a foreign national, then you are not able to apply until 5 years after you became a foreign national. So those are some of the ineligibilities in terms of applying for a H&C application. In terms of the procedural steps, if you're submitting an application on your own, then you need to gather documents, supporting documents. You also need to fill the application, complete the application form, pay the applicable government fees, and mail your application to the right IRC office. Also, the processing times, we said 29 months if you have submitted your application already, and 22 to 36 months if you have not submitted your application as of yet. In terms of the impact of COVID-19, it's important to note that applications will not be refused, or they will not be refused because you are not able to obtain a document that is requested on your application. Those applications are in progress, and you can still submit a H&C application if you are eligible. So that is the presentation on humanitarian and compassionate applications. So we're going to be taking questions. If you have All right, so I'm back, and so we have two questions from Olufemi Jayesimi and Ikeja. So I believe these questions are similar. So the first question from Olufemi is, can someone outside Canada who do not have establishment and family tie in Canada apply for the H&C? And the other question from Ikeja is, can someone apply for H&C from outside Canada? If yes, what are the conditions to be met? So as I mentioned earlier, generally you are only able to apply for a H&C application within Canada. For those who who want to apply from outside of Canada, then you have to apply for PR under either the family class, the economic immigration, or the refugee class. So those are the requirements. So if you're not eligible for any of those immigration classes, then you cannot apply for H&C from outside Canada. So you have to have an application for PR either under the family class, the economic class, or the refugee class, in which you then accompany your H&C application with that. So if you don't fall into one of those categories, then I doubt that you can actually make an application from outside for a H&C application by itself. So you cannot just submit an H&C application from outside Canada without any of those classes. So I hope that answers your question. I would like you to please follow us on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and we're also on YouTube. You can also send us an email for any inquiries that you have at info@tpmattorneys.com, tpmattorneys.com, and our website is www.tpmattorneys.com. So I have a question here that's been sent directly to me. It seems to be a general question, so I'm just going to read it out. If you are banned for a specific period due to non-disclosure in your immigration application, after the banned period has elapsed, do you have a better chance in applying for express entry and you submit a H&C application at the same time? So I'm just going to read this again. It's quite lengthy. So if you are banned for a specific period due to non-disclosure in an immigration application, after the banned period has elapsed, do you have a better chance if applying for if you're applying for an express entry and you submit a H&C at the same time? Yeah, so if you qualify for an express entry application, then you can, yes, include with your application a H&C component to it. So yeah, that is a possibility for you to submit your application. So I hope that answers your question. Technically, since the period has elapsed, then you may not need to, but also there's no one size fits all. So you might be able to just submit your application as is, or you can even to have a better chance, as you said, include a H&C component to your application. So we have a question from Kunle Isiaka. And his question is, can someone with family tie in Canada whose refugee hearing is not yet decided apply? Sorry, I missed the earlier part of your presentation. No worries. So, so if you have family ties, as I said earlier, if you have a pending refugee claim, then you cannot submit a H&C application. You would have to either withdraw the refugee claim before you are able to submit your H&C application. So you cannot do both at the same time. It's either you withdraw it and submit your H&C application. But I mean, if that is the only component of your, except you have other components, that's something that you may want to also seek legal advice from a lawyer from. If you want to consult with us, you can do that afterwards, or if you have a lawyer, you can consult with them specifically. So there's another question. I don't know if this is from a specific person directly to me. I've been told it's better to apply for H&C or H&C of refugee, especially if you have stayed in Canada for long. So it depends. So it depends on your status in Canada. So it depends on your status. So this question from this person says, I've been told it's better to apply for H&C instead of refugee, especially if you have stayed in Canada for long, like 2 years. I mean, how have you been in Canada for 2 years? What is the status of your application? It might be better. So it's an option for you. So if, for instance, you've consulted a lawyer, if there's a risk to your life, then that might be an option. But if you have a ground for H&C, it depends on your eligibility. So are you eligible for the H&C application? If you are, then that can also be a possibility for you to submit a H&C application. If you have no risk of persecution, then you have really no reason to be submitting a refugee claim. So we have a question from Redme. I'm sorry, I missed part of the conference. What are the requirements to be qualified for H&C, and can someone apply outside of Canada? So I mean, what we said earlier was that you cannot apply for a H&C application outside of Canada. The only way you can do that is if you are applying for a permanent residence application in one of the 3 classes that I mentioned. That's the family class, the economic class, or refugee class. So if you're applying for any of those classes, then you can submit a H&C application together with it, but you cannot submit a H&C application by itself from outside Canada. So this is a specific question, I believe. Husband came to Canada and is a failed refugee. If the wife joined in Canada, is it better for H&C, especially because of children? So I believe that is, I can't say which is better. It all depends on the specific situation of the applicants in question. So this is a case where if you have a legal representative, they would, in consulting with you, discuss the best options in terms of making an application for H&C. I would suggest that that person seeks legal advice. But if you qualify for H&C application, as I said, if you have the best interest of the child, and the person who is applying is not within the 1-year bar, then they can submit a H&C application. If we have another question from Temi, and she says, can you apply for provincial nominee plus H&C at the same time? Yeah, so the provincial nominee is for, I believe, for you're applying, this is an economic class. So is that person outside of Canada or in Canada? So if it's an economic class and there's probably some inadmissibility issue there, then yeah, you can apply. So provincial nominee is just, it's just a means to an end. So you're applying under either the federal class or the federal skilled worker class. So that's an economic immigration. So if you're applying for express entry, which is still also an economic immigration, then you qualify for H&C, yes, you can apply for that. So in terms of examples for applications made outside Canada, so in terms of the family components, so if you have a sponsorship, if you have a spouse, for instance, in Canada, they can sponsor you as a member of the family class, or if you have children outside of Canada, you can sponsor them as your family member. So that is an example of an application that can be made outside of Canada based on H&C considerations. Also, yeah, so we had Temitope's question regarding provincial nominees and H&C applications. So that will be somewhat an economic immigration. So that can be also submitted with the H&C application. So I'm still getting this question regarding making a H&C application outside of Canada, either under the family class or the economic class. So I gave the example of an express entry application submitted together with a H&C application. In terms of the family sponsorship, if, for instance, the applicant is inadmissible or does not meet the requirement of the Act, in terms of a family sponsorship, either a spouse who is in outside of Nigeria, outside of Canada, or a child or family member, then they can submit a H&C application together with their PR application. Okay, so we don't have any more questions from anyone. I hope that answered your questions. If you had a question, I hope we answered your questions. If you would like to reach out to us, you can send us an email to info@tpmattorneys.com, and we will be ending the session now. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. We have other sessions and we have posted the details in the chat. You can take advantage of those sessions in the next few days that are coming. Thank you once again for coming and joining us, and have a blessed day. Bye.